The third important thing to remember in terms of hopefully creating a successful treatment outcome is the selection of the treatment strategy. Now, I know I said earlier the therapeutic alliance plays the most significant role overall, oftentimes 2 times more important, according to some of the literature out there, as to the selection of the treatment strategy. But that doesn't mean that the selection of the treatment strategy is unimportant. It doesn't mean that at all. And let me just give you an illustration. When I was in the military, I worked with a gal. Well, actually, let me back up a second. The case was brought in by our director, and the person had a file this big. All right, she'd been in and out of treatment many times in her lifetime at this particular military hospital, okay? And, the director said, hey, who wants the case? Nobody wanted her. Well, I was a newbie on the block, so it went to me. And I understood very fast that this was going to be a challenging case, not just because of the thickness of the file, but after meeting her and trying to establish a therapeutic relationship alliance, I utilized a treatment strategy that was unsuccessful, and then every strategy I used thereafter was pretty unsuccessful. The first one I used made absolutely perfectly good sense that it would be unsuccessful, but kind of being a novice, I didn't think things clearly through enough. Her presenting complaint primarily was anxiety, panic disorder, which meant she had a lot of anxiety-related attacks. Right? So in my mind, relaxation training, biofeedback training would be a nice match for that process, and normally it would be. I forgot the somatoform component. She also had what we call hypochondriasis, which is a fixation on bodily issues, making something seem more important than what it actually is. So this mole could be cancer type of thing. It's an illustration anyway. So she would magnify bodily complaints. So when we got her into some relaxation training and some breathing techniques, diaphragmatic breathing exercises, she focused so much on the breathing that she actually started hyperventilating. So that was my mistake. Normally biofeedback would be a good intervention for an anxiety-related complaint, but not with someone who also has what we call a somatoform-related disorder like hypochondriasis. But I eventually tried other interventions, and invariably she would sabotage the process. She would say something like, "Well, I've tried that before; it doesn't work," or I would give an assignment that would make sense. We kind of agreed upon, collaborated on the assignment, and she'd come back and not do it. So there was a lot of resistance to the treatment interventions that were utilized. Even though she said she wanted certain outcomes, she would unconsciously sabotage those outcomes. And then I started thinking more about the case and conceptualizing it a bit more appropriately. I realized she had a history of being abandoned in life. She grew up in a very aloof home situation. Her parents were not very warm, not very caring, didn't really interact with her in a way that would be conducive to psychological health. They were very cold, like I said, and aloof, distant, inaccessible. Okay, so she had abandonment early in life, and then in her marriage, it had deteriorated to such a point where the husband didn't like interacting with her a whole lot, and when she tried to interact or kind of get more attention, he would do things to try to push her away, which would be not physical abuse per se, but he would destroy something she valued, like a piece of furniture she inherited from her parents. He'd take a bat to it and destroy it. Right? So she was used to abandonment. She was also used to abandonment in the mental health field. She went from one clinician to another. She was in and out of treatment. And if she dropped out of treatment, in a sense, clinicians didn't pursue her, didn't try to get her back into treatment. They were actually relieved to a certain extent that she wasn't there anymore. So she was used to abandonment. When I finally got that concept, I realized that what I had to do was do everything opposite of abandonment. I had to stand still or move towards her in my mind. That's how I conceptualized it. And what that would mean would be, if for some reason she somehow missed a session, I would get on the phone right away and say, I know you missed the session, and let's see if we can get you in tomorrow, in the morning or as soon as possible, and we would reschedule as quickly as imaginable. Now, rarely did that happen, but if it happened, that's the stance that I took with her. And I initially, for the first few months of working with her, I decided I would meet her twice a week instead of once a week. So again, I'm not running away, I'm actually moving towards my client, and saying I'm not going away anytime soon. And thank goodness the psychiatrist, who just was one of the greatest psychiatrists I ever worked with, she assumed the case as well. She was kind of a newbie on board as well, so she assumed the psychopharmacological treatment of the client, and she had conceptualized the case the same way, and so she was going to meet with the client once every 2 weeks, whether she needed it or not. And she was able to find a physician in that military hospital who was willing to see this client once a month, whether she needed it or not, because this was a client who ended up in the ER couple, 3 times a week, thinking she was having a heart attack, and the verdict was always, no, sorry, it's an anxiety attack. So and of course when they saw her, they kind of like, oh, here she comes again type of thing, and so it was never a pleasant experience. And then when she got the news that it was an anxiety attack, she would be disappointed, because she would be just convinced, now this is a real heart attack. So it was, again, a history of being abandoned, and so we had to demonstrate that we were not going to abandon her. So what we did, again, is I met with her a couple times a week, the psychiatrist met with her once every 2 weeks, and a physician would meet with her once every month. So we're giving her messages, we're not going anywhere. And in terms of the therapeutic approach, I had gone through a progression of different modalities, and I decided that I was just going to be there and listen to her, period. Not pressure her to engage in any assignments, but just take the time. Because I had to take, it suddenly dawned on me, I had to take more time to earn the right to treat her, to establish this therapeutic relationship. And so I was just going to be there to listen to her. And eventually, over the course of time, when she realized we weren't abandoning her, if anything, we were just going to stand still or move towards her, she, it's sort of like, when someone is desperate and they need help, they kind of, hold on to you, that sometimes grab you by the throat. That's an analogy anyway. Grab you by the throat, they need help, and your natural reaction is to push them away. Well, if you do that, their natural reaction is to hold on tighter, right? When she realized we weren't pushing her away, she began to loosen her grip. She began to relax. She began to talk about her marital problems. I was able then to begin to help her see things a little bit differently. We were beginning to make inroads in terms of the relationship, the marriage. She began to see gains in that marriage. She began to see gains with the psychiatrist and the psychopharmacological approach for the anxiety. She began to see gains in terms of the therapeutic approach, in terms of management of the anxiety. And it was a long, drawn-out process. I mean, a few months of seeing her twice a week, and then eventually a year or two seeing her once a week, and then finally we were able to get to the point where I could see her once every 2 weeks and then once every 3 weeks. This was a 5-year progression, but with cost-effective outcomes. She was functioning more adaptively, but we had to have the patience to achieve that outcome. And when I left the military, I was a bit afraid she might regress. So I, in conjunction with another clinician who had a similar style to what I had, we sat down together, all three of us, for a few months before I left the military. So by then she had bonded to this clinician, and when I left, there was no regression from what I understand in talking later to the clinician who assumed responsibility for her in terms of the therapeutic intervention. So that's just an illustration of how important the conceptualization of the case is, but based on that, picking the right intervention strategy. Because I can't tell you how many different strategies I ended up using, probably 7, 8 different strategies, all without any success, until I finally saw what was happening, understood what was happening, and then in conjunction with the psychiatrist who was working with her, we came up with a treatment plan that was successful. So those 3 points are very important. Therapeutic alliance, the relationship, earning the right to treat the client, very, very important. Number 1 on my list. Accurate diagnosis is the second thing. Accurate diagnosis. You have to know what you're treating. You have to have the presenting problem down accurately. So that leads you then to a correct conceptualization of the case, and picking out the most effective, the most appropriate intervention strategy. Keep that in mind as you work with clients if you head into the mental health field. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the class. Thank you.